She told me not to call myself her boyfriend, just say I'm a friend. And the second she said it, I felt something in me go quiet. I never thought I'd post anything like this. But I need to put it somewhere that isn't my own head. This isn't about someone getting caught in bed with another person. There was no confession of sex while we were officially together. But I learned the hard way that you can be betrayed long before anything physical happens. For privacy, all names are changed. I'm Ryan. I was 31 when this happened. She was Melissa, 29. We'd been together a little over 2 years. We met through mutual friends at a casual backyard hangout. Melissa was magnetic. She could make a group of strangers feel like they'd known her forever. I was the opposite, more reserved, more routine. I worked in logistics, early mornings, predictable schedule, stable paycheck. She said she loved that I was steady, that I made her feel safe, and I leaned into that role like it was the highest compliment anyone could give me. When her freelance work slowed down, I quietly covered more of the bills. When she panicked about client proposals, I sat next to her at the kitchen table and helped rewrite them. When she lost a major contract, I planned small weekend trips to get her out of her head. I didn't keep score. I thought that was what you do when you love someone. The first year was solid. We argued sometimes, sure, but it felt normal then. Around the time we hit 18 months, things didn't explode. They thinned, like the relationship started losing color. She'd be in the same room, but not really there. She'd answer my questions with half sentences. When I tried to start conversations, she'd respond like she was multitasking, even if she wasn't doing anything but scrolling. At first, I blamed stress, deadlines, money, the usual. Then I started noticing her phone. She wasn't hiding it in a dramatic way. She just held it closer, tilted it away, smiled at things that didn't involve me. It was small, the kind of thing you tell yourself not to overthink because you don't want to be that guy. And then there was Aaron. Aaron didn't show up as a villain. He showed up as a name that got mentioned too often. He has this insane work ethic. He just got back from Chicago. He does so much. He's really connected. He knows everyone. He gets what I'm trying to build. She met him through a professional circle, a local meetup that turned into regular networking nights. Same industry, similar clients, different energy. He was the kind of guy who posted gym selfies and airport lounges and motivational captions, the type Melissa used to roll her eyes at until she didn't. At first, I tried to be supportive. I asked about her events. I told her I was proud she was putting herself out there. I even drove her to one when her car was in the shop, but her tone changed when she talked about him. It wasn't admiration. It was attention. Like the way someone's voice warms up when they say a name that matters. One night I was on the couch watching a show we'd started together, and she was in the chair near the window laughing at her phone. Not a polite chuckle, a real laugh, the kind she used to do with me. I asked what was funny. She said, "Nothing, just something stupid I didn't push." A minute later, she laughed again. I asked again, softer. She sighed like I was interrupting something important. It's just Aaron being Aaron. That should have been my first real warning, not because she was texting a guy, but because she said his name like it was obvious I should already understand why that mattered. A week later, we were cooking dinner, and I saw a notification flash when she set her phone down. I didn't grab it. I didn't snoop. I only saw the preview because it popped up. "Aaron, you're trouble. I like it." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't accuse her. I didn't shout. I asked, calmly, "What's that about?" She didn't even look nervous. She rolled her eyes and said, "It's banter, relax." I said, "That doesn't sound like work?" She laughed once, like I'd told a joke. "God, Ryan, you're being insecure. He talks like that with everyone." I wanted to believe her. So I told myself I was reading into it. I told myself if I turned this into a big thing, I'd become the controlling boyfriend. I hated that idea. I hated the thought that I might be wrong. But after that, little things stacked up. She started canceling plans more often. Dinner with my sister, a weekend hike, even a movie night she'd suggested. She'd say she was exhausted. Then an hour later, she'd be doing makeup and leaving to meet people for a quick drink. When she got back, she'd be energized, chatty, glowing, like she'd just been plugged into a charger I didn't have access to. I tried to talk to her about it, not about Aaron, about us. She listened the way someone listens to a podcast they don't care about, nods at the wrong moments, Yeah, totally. Then changes the subject. I started feeling like I was auditioning for my own relationship. And then, 3 weeks before the party, we fought about something stupid, laundry, a dish in the sink. It wasn't really about that. It was about the way she looked at me lately, like she was bored, she said. You're so predictable. That word hit harder than it should have. Predictable meant safe, and safe was supposed to be good. But the way she said it made it sound like a flaw. After that, I tried to fix myself in the dumbest ways. I bought new clothes. I started going to the gym more. I suggested spontaneous date ideas. She'd smile and say, "Ah," like I was a kid showing her a drawing. Then came the party. It was a birthday celebration for one of her friends. A rented loft space downtown, music, drinks, people from different circles. She had been talking about it for weeks, like it was a big deal, like it was a chance to finally have fun. The afternoon of the party, we were getting ready at our apartment. I remember the exact scene because it's burned into me. She was standing in front of the mirror, doing her eyeliner with this intense focus. I was tying my shoes at the edge of the bed. The room smelled like her perfume and hairspray. Normal. Familiar. Then she said, without turning around, "Hey, tonight, don't introduce yourself as my boyfriend. Just say you're a friend." I actually froze. Like my brain needed a second to process the words. I said, "What?" She kept applying eyeliner like she hadn't just dropped a bomb. "Some people from my work circle will be there. It'll just be easier," I asked. "Easier for who?" She sighed, irritated. "Ryan, don't do this. I don't want it to be awkward," I said. "Why would it be awkward if I'm your boyfriend?" She finally looked at me in the mirror. Not directly, just through the reflection. Because Aaron might be there, okay? And I don't want him thinking I'm like locked down, locked down. That phrase made me feel small, like being with me was a chain she wanted to hide. I felt my face get hot. I tried to keep my voice steady. "So you want to look single?" She scoffed. "No, I just want to keep things light. Labels are restrictive." "It's one night," I asked. "Are we together or not?" She rolled her eyes again. "Of course we are. Why are you making everything so dramatic?" I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to say, if you have to pretend I don't exist, what am I doing here? But I didn't. I swallowed it and said, "Okay, not because I agreed, because I understood. If she could say that out loud, casually, like it was nothing, then the relationship I thought we had wasn't the relationship she was living in." We drove to the party in near silence. She scrolled on her phone the whole way, occasionally smiling. I stared out the window, feeling this weird calm settle in. Like the part of me that used to panic was tired. The loft was packed. Strings of warm lights, loud music, people laughing in clusters. Melissa's posture changed the second we walked in. She became brighter, more animated, like she'd stepped onto a stage. A group of people came over to greet her. Someone I didn't recognize asked, "Hey, Melissa, who's this?" Melissa opened her mouth, and I answered first because I wanted to see what would happen. "Hey, I'm Ryan," I said. Calm. Melissa and I used to date. The words landed like a glass dropped on concrete. A couple people laughed in confusion. Someone said, "Wait, used to." Melissa's face tightened for a split second. Then she forced a laugh. "He's kidding. That's my boyfriend." I shrugged lightly. We agreed to keep it light tonight. I didn't say it with anger. I didn't say it with drama. I said it like it was a simple fact. Melissa's eyes flashed, but she smiled through it and pulled me away. Toward another group, the next introduction happened 10 minutes later. Someone said, "How do you two know each other?" I said it again. Same calm, same words. By the third time, she grabbed my arm hard enough that it hurt and dragged me toward the kitchen area where the music was quieter. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she hissed. "You're embarrassing me." I looked at her and felt something I hadn't felt in months. "Clarity, you told me not to introduce myself as your boyfriend," I said. "So I'm not." She stared at me like I'd violated some unspoken rule. "I didn't mean act like we're broken up," she snapped. "I meant don't make it a thing. You made it a thing when you asked me to pretend." She crossed her arms. Defensive. "You're so literal, God. Aaron's important for my career. Networking matters. I didn't want him thinking I'm tied down because it changes how people see you." I heard the words, and all I could think was, she cares more about how he sees her than how I feel standing next to her. I asked, so what is he to you? She hesitated for half a second, then smiled like I was stupid for asking. He's just, someone who gets me, he challenges me, he's exciting. You're great, Ryan, but you're safe. Safe again. Then she said, in this careless tone, like she was admitting she'd forgotten to buy ice, it's not like I'm cheating. Not yet. Not yet. My chest went cold. She saw my expression change and tried to recover. I didn't mean it like that. I just mean... But it was too late. She'd said the quiet part out loud. She'd admitted there was a line in her mind, and she was already walking toward it. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg. I simply said, we're done. Her mouth fell open. What, over this? Are you serious? I nodded once. You asked me to show up as a friend so you could look available to someone you're already emotionally invested in. You don't respect me? I'm not doing this. She scoffed, trying to turn it into a joke. You're being dramatic. I looked her in the eyes and said, no, I'm being honest. Then I walked out. I left the noise behind me. I felt the cold air hit my face outside and my hands were shaking. But my head felt strangely quiet, like I'd been underwater for months and finally surfaced. I got in my car and sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. Then I drove away. I didn't go back to the loft. I didn't wait for an apology. I drove until the city lights blurred and my hands stopped shaking. I parked a few blocks from my friend Caleb's place, sat there with the engine off and stared at my phone. It was silent for a minute. Then it started. First one text from Melissa. Where are you? Then another. You're seriously leaving. Then stop acting like a child. I didn't reply. I muted the notifications and walked up to Caleb's door with my overnight bag. He opened it, took one look at my face, and just stepped aside. No questions, no speeches. He handed me a glass of water and turned on a random game in the background like he knew the noise would help. I sat on his couch and felt the reality settle in. Not heartbreak exactly. More like the shock of finally admitting what I'd been denying. I hadn't been in a relationship for months. I'd been in a holding pattern. I slept a couple of hours, woke up before sunrise, and the first thing I felt was that heavy urge to second-guess myself. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have talked it through. Maybe I should have waited until morning. Then I remembered the words, not yet, and that urge disappeared. Because you don't accidentally say not yet. You say it when you've already pictured it. You say it when the line is already behind you in your mind. The next day, I went to our apartment while she was out. I didn't take everything, just what I needed. Clothes, laptop, some personal items. I left my key on the counter, not as a dramatic statement. Just because I was done having access to a place where I didn't feel wanted, I sent one message, we're broken up, please don't contact me. Then I blocked her number, I blocked her on social media, I blocked the email she used for personal stuff. It felt extreme. But I knew myself. If I left a crack open, she would use it. Not because she loved me, but because she hated losing control. The first week was quiet, not peaceful. Quiet like the air after a storm where you keep waiting for another clap of thunder. I stayed at Caleb's, went to work, came home, ate whatever was easiest, and tried not to replay the party over and over. But the replay happened anyway, her face in the mirror, her saying locked down, her smile when she thought I would just comply, and the worst part was how normal she sounded, like asking me to erase myself was as casual as asking me to grab ice on the way. In the second week, the guilt started fading and the anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger, more like a slow burn. I'd been loyal, consistent, supportive, and she had treated my presence like a liability, like something she needed to minimize so someone else would look at her differently. I started writing things down, not poetry, not dramatic paragraphs, just facts. The nights she canceled, the times she compared me, the messages that made my stomach drop, the way she dismissed me when I asked for basic respect. Seeing it all in plain words made it impossible to romanticize. It also made something else clear. I didn't leave because of one party. I left because I finally saw the truth without excuses. Around week 3, the messages found ways around the blocks, unknown numbers, new accounts, a long email from an address I didn't recognize. It was Melissa. She wrote like she was the victim of a misunderstanding. She said she never meant it that way. She said it was just professional networking. She said I humiliated her. She said I threw away 2 years over a joke. She said I was punishing her. I read it once and felt nothing but exhaustion. Because if she understood what she did, she wouldn't be framing it as my cruelty. She would be apologizing for her own. I didn't respond. That silence seemed to trigger a new phase. She started reaching out through mutual friends. One text from a guy I barely knew. "Hey man, Melissa's really upset. Can you just talk to her?" I told him, "No. Please don't involve yourself." Then I blocked him too. Another friend tried a softer approach. "She's having a hard time. She regrets it. You were always so good to her." I didn't argue. I just said, "I'm not discussing it." What surprised me was how quickly some people assumed my job was to absorb the damage and restore the peace. Like my boundaries were optional if her emotions were big enough. I learned something important right there. Not everyone is on your side. Some people are just on the side of the person who makes the most noise. By the end of the first month, life started to settle into a new pattern. And in that pattern, I could finally hear my own thoughts again. I stopped walking on eggshells. I stopped waiting for her mood to decide my evening. I stopped watching myself so I wouldn't be called predictable. I started running in the mornings, not to impress anyone, but because it burned off the anxious energy that had been living in my chest for too long. I took the transfer opportunity that I'd once declined. Same company, different team, bigger responsibilities, better pay. It wasn't revenge success. It was just me taking my life back. I also started therapy, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd normalized being dismissed. The therapist asked me a question in the first session. When did you start believing love meant tolerating disrespect? And I didn't have an answer. But the question stayed with me meanwhile. The story of Melissa and Aaron didn't stay hidden. Not because I went looking, but because people talk, and they love to talk when there's mess. A mutual acquaintance told me Melissa had been spending more and more time with Aaron after the party. Openly, not exactly dating, but close enough that everyone knew what it was. She was posting photos from new places, little captions about choosing herself, about freedom, about living louder. It was the kind of content that looks confident until you realize it's performative. Then the cracks started showing. Aaron wasn't the fantasy she'd built in her head. He wasn't a clean new beginning. He was chaos dressed up as confidence. He bounced between attention and distance. He loved being chased. He loved being admired. He loved being the reason someone felt alive, and he had no interest in being responsible for what happened next. Melissa started missing deadlines, arguing with clients, getting a reputation for being unreliable. She blamed stress, she blamed mental health. She blamed everyone except the choices that were draining her. One day, someone in our circle mentioned she'd lost a major contract because she'd been too distracted and kept rescheduling. Another person said she was late on rent and had moved in with a friend temporarily. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just felt a quiet confirmation of what I already knew. When you build your sense of worth on someone else's attention, you end up starving when that attention shifts. 2 months after the breakup, she showed up at Caleb's place. I hadn't told her where I was, but she must have pieced it together. I opened the door and saw her standing there with red eyes and a face that looked like it had been crying for days. She tried to push past me like she still had access. I stepped to the side just enough to block the doorway, she said. "Please, Ryan, just let me talk," I said. "No, we can talk here." She looked around like she expected to see my life waiting to be returned to her. Then she started. She said she made a mistake. She said she didn't realize how serious I was. She said I embarrassed her at the party. She said I could have handled it privately. I didn't react. I listened. And in the pause after her complaints, I said, "You're still making it about you." She blinked like she didn't understand. I said, "You asked me to hide our relationship so you could look available to a man you were emotionally invested in? You said, 'Not yet.' You didn't apologize that night. You argued, you minimized, you insulted me. You made me feel like I was in the way." She started crying harder. She said, "I never cheated." And I said, "You were already leaving. You were already choosing him with your attention, with your energy, with your excuses. You wanted me to wait in the background. That's what this was." She shook her head fast and said, "I was confused. I was stressed. I didn't mean it." I said, "You meant it enough to say it out loud." Then she switched tactics. She said, "Aaron didn't turn out how she thought. She said he was selfish. She said he led her on. She said he made her feel small, and there it was." The real reason she came back, not because she respected what we had, but because her new option wasn't stable. She looked at me and said, "You were always good to me. I need that. I need you." And something in me settled completely. Because love doesn't sound like "I need you" the way she said it. Love sounds like "I'm sorry I hurt you." Love sounds like "I understand what I did." I said, "Melissa, I'm not your backup plan." She flinched. She said, "You're being cruel." And I said, "No, I'm being consistent." Then I said, "I wish you well, but you can't come back into my life." She stared at me like she couldn't believe the door wasn't opening. She started to get angry. She said, "You think you're better than me now." And I said, "This isn't about being better. It's about boundaries." She looked past me again and said, "So that's it. 2 years, and you can just turn it off." I said, "You turned it off first? You just wanted me to keep the lights on?" She stood there for a long second, then she snapped, "Fine, enjoy being boring." And she walked away. I closed the door and felt a strange relief. Not triumph. Relief. Like I'd finally passed a test I didn't know I was taking after that. She tried again through different channels. More messages from new numbers, long emails, voice notes sent through apps I didn't even use. And when that didn't work, the smear posts started. Vague captions about betrayal, about men who punish women, about people who can't forgive. It backfired, because anyone who knew the situation knew what the posts were really about, and anyone who didn't know didn't care. Time moved on, and her performance didn't get her what she wanted. Around month 4, I met someone new. Not a whirlwind, not a rebound, just a calm connection. Her name was Jade. I met her through my running group. She was straightforward, no games. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Being with her felt simple in the best way, like I didn't have to constantly prove I was enough. And that contrast made me realize how heavy my old relationship had been. The final confrontation happened at a mutual friend's wedding, about 6 months after the breakup. I almost didn't go because I knew Melissa might be there. But I refused to plan my life around her discomfort anymore. I went with Jade. We kept it low-key, smiled, danced, enjoyed the night. Near the end of the reception, Melissa approached me. She looked different. Not just physically, but in posture, like someone carrying a story they can't rewrite. She asked if we could talk privately. Jade squeezed my hand and nodded, and I walked with Melissa to a quieter area near the patio lights. Melissa started with an apology, but it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. She said she was in therapy. She said she understood now. She said she was sorry for hurting me. Then she said, "I want another chance." And I felt the old version of me, the one who used to soften when she cried, try to rise, but the newer version of me stayed seated. I said, "I accept your apology, but we're not getting back together." Her face tightened. She said, "Why not? I'm different now," I said. "Maybe you are, but I'm different too. I learned what I will not tolerate, and I will not go back to someone who asked me to pretend I didn't exist." She tried to argue that it wasn't that serious, and I said, "It was serious enough to end it." She asked if I ever missed her, and I said, "I missed the person I thought you were." Then I said, "I hope you heal, but you can't heal inside my life." She went quiet. Then her voice sharpened. She glanced back toward the room and said, "So you're really choosing her over me?" I said, "No, I'm choosing myself." And I walked back to the dance floor. Later that night, my phone lit up with an unknown number. One last message from Melissa. "You'll regret this. I deleted it without replying because the truth was, I didn't regret leaving. I regretted how long I stayed after the respect was gone. If anyone reading this is in a relationship where you feel hidden, where you're asked to shrink so someone else can shine, please understand this. You don't have to wait for physical cheating to count it as betrayal. Sometimes the moment they ask you to pretend you're not together is the moment you should believe what they're really saying. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away quietly and never come back.